I want to touch on our situation with labor unions. It's come into play, and I think it's worth giving you a little update as to where we stand. Westchester County has a number of different public unions that we contract with. Most of our labor force is a unionized labor force. There are some individuals who are not members of unions, and they are non-represented managerial positions. And with each of these different situations, whenever there's any change in the pay structure, it has to be approved by the Board of Legislators and signed into action by myself as county executive. We have a negotiating team headed by a contractual arrangement that we have with Vince Toomey, who handles the day-to-day negotiations for us as an outside consultant. He's a lawyer and his team, and they do this for other municipalities as well. So it's a professional negotiating team, and it really takes things to the level of following the very strict labor laws that exist in New York State. We have the Taylor Law, which was passed a number of years ago, which sort of sets some of the ground rules for how these things work. The executive branch in any government negotiates with the unions. They come up with some arrangement. If the union ratifies it, it goes before the legislative body for approval, and then it goes into effect for whatever length of time that is. So that you understand what that looks like in its totality, here are the various unions that we have. We have Westchester County CSEA, which is the largest union by far. Roughly 3/4 of all of our county employees, our base of employees, over 4,000 employees, are members of CSEA. We have negotiated with them, and we are on contractual arrangements with them through the end of the year 2027. Now, when we came into office, there was a 7-year gap between my predecessor's administration and closing the arrangements with that union. We had a very difficult measure to close that gap with a number of out years, but we did that successfully, and they agreed to a rollover for 1 year, and now we've recently, earlier this year, completed negotiations, so they're on contract through 2027. We have a group of nurses that we saw up close and personal. Most of them work in our Department of Health, but some of them are elsewhere in the county government and some of the other departments, DSS notably, and they are members of the New York State Nurses Association, NYSNA, and that we've had negotiations with them. We've closed those negotiations successfully through the end of the year 2026. So they are on contract, and each of these different unions have different increases. They also have certain benefits that are unique to what they do, and certain incentive payments that deal with longevity or certain levels of professional experience. We have a number of Teamsters who are organized in Westchester County. They represent one particular department of our county government, and we've had negotiations that have come successful closure there. They are on contract through the end of 2025, this being the end of 2023. So we have to 27 on CSEA, we have through the end of 26 on nurses, and we have through the end of 25 on Teamsters. And those three unions are in certain ways considered sort of the white-collar unions or the pink-collar unions of our government. We also have to approve, although we do not negotiate, the CSEA chapter and the Federation of Teachers, who are negotiating with the Westchester Community College, but the county has to approve those contracts, and for both teachers and for CSEA, we await successful closure from the community college, and then the county executive and the county legislature reviews those contracts and puts them to bed. We have an additional 5 unions that are in the law enforcement lane, and law enforcement positions are seen as different type of responsibilities, and they're compared to other law enforcement unions around the country, around the state, which are very different from some of the other ones. We have in our police PBA, Police Benevolent Association, then we have a Superior Officers PBA, and the negotiations for both of those two unions have been successfully concluded a while back, and they are on contract through the end of this year, 2023. So we would begin negotiations with them for future years to follow. We recently announced, we had a press conference to recently announce that we have closed our past arrangements with DA investigators. These are the people who work for the district attorney, do investigative work. They're all former police officers, and but they have a special function. They're a special union, and they had last had a contract closed at 2019, and we were able to close that through 2023. So they will be current up to the end of 23. We begin negotiations going forward, except that we added an extra year. They close at the end of 24 now, and so the conversations will take us beyond that. We have now, as you see, some dialogue in the public sector, certainly on social media outlets and in other ways, that the correction officers and the correction superior officers are the remaining union, or unions, there's two of them, superior officers and correction officers, that have not closed. Their contracts last ended in 2019. It is not our practice to negotiate out in public. There's a structure and a format for these negotiations. We have not truly gone very deeply in our conversations with them. The conversations actually started not that long ago, even though the contract went out in 2019. It was the decision by union leaders to open up conversations a little further down the line. They wanted to see, frankly, what other unions were getting. And many times correction officers look at what the police officers get and want a pattern off of the police officers. Because the union was 4 years out, 2020, 21, 22, and 23 years. We're almost at the end of 23. We made some informal discussions with them and some informal offers to stay on the same pattern as what the DA investigators and the police have done, and COBRA was not interested in going in that direction. That would have involved them being brought up to the end of 23 and continuing negotiations forward. We're now at a situation, obviously, where there's much discussion and a bit of Sturm und Drang out there. This is the nature of negotiations. Anybody who's ever done negotiations understands there's a certain amount of theatrics to it, and there's a certain amount of positioning that happens. It does not offend me personally. I understand that that's part of the arrangement. What I do want to highlight is that as the correction officers want to have what they would call a fair arrangement, every union wants a fair arrangement by their standards, they have asked for the highest level of compensation of any of our county employees, and they've also asked for other benefits they don't have right now. The current contract that they're operating under was not negotiated by our administration. It was negotiated by the prior administration, and there was some givebacks that occurred in the negotiations that happened prior to that, also from the prior administration. So many of the correction officers are unhappy over those arrangements. They'd like those concessions to be made, but let's be clear, they were not imposed by our administration. They were imposed previously, and they were agreed to at the time by the membership. So what you're looking to do is sit at the table and change the rules under which certain things happen in healthcare and other things. We are a flexible administration. We've talked to every one of these other unions, and when you start out, the first session is never the last session. You begin with them asking for X, and you're prepared to do Y, and then the negotiations get you to a common ground at some point in time. We've been able to successfully do that with CSEA, Teamsters, nurses, Superior Police, regular police, DA investigators, and we've authorized, when positioned to us, the two unions that are at the community college. So we have this particular situation that has not yet reached fruition. I say that because many times in the process of this sort of theatrical situation, bad faith is imputed. And I would argue that we have not yet truly begun to exchange positions because there are certain things that the union wants and there are certain things that the county wants. And in a negotiation, nobody gets everything they want, and you have to determine how much you're willing to give in order to get certain things and what's important to your membership, what isn't important to your membership as we go forward. There is no question that every county employee does a job that's important for the public service in every one of the different areas. And I don't doubt for one second how difficult it is to be a correction officer or a superior correction officer. They are serving their county in a tremendous way. I would not say that because one county official serves in one capacity that it demeans the service of somebody else. Our nurses that went into private homes to do COVID tests, not knowing what the extent of this disease was, they too served Westchester County. We have individuals who work in different departments of county government and go through some very difficult circumstances in their work. And some of those CSEA members are involved in the Parks Department. They're involved in the Department of Environmental Facilities. They too make sacrifices for the jobs that they have. So we don't want to try to weigh out this job is so much better than the other job. And certainly our police officers provide a very essential service to all of us. So our position as a government is to negotiate with each of the different unions, to respect them, and to try to find common ground. And common ground does mean a give and a take. And anybody who's ever negotiated, if you've ever haggled over a sweater or a scarf at a flea market, if you had negotiations over the house that you bought or over a used car that you ever bought, it's never on the first round that you settle on the price. There's always a back and a forth, and that is part of the price. Some people actually like that. They enjoy the haggling back and forth before something gets done. But where we are today is we have completed negotiations and are on contract through the end of the year with all of our unions, with the exception of correction officers and superior officers. We are right now reaching out to set up a date to sit down at the bargaining table, have those discussions, their opening offer, our opening offer, and then we go from there. I remain confident that we will come to closure, and there is a process that involves arbitration and mediation and other things if it gets to that. And if it goes through that process, we will follow the legal process. The Westchester County Board of Legislators does not have a role to play in the negotiating phase of this, but when an agreement has been made, if it's been ratified by the union, then it goes before the board for their approval. And they have the right to accept or reject the final contract put before them. And if it's already been negotiated and it's already been approved by the union, almost always it is approved by the legislature as well. But we'll have those discussions in the days to come. This matters a lot to you if you are a family member or an actual member of one of these unions. If you're outside of that, you certainly want the public service that these individuals provide. If they're a nurse, if they're a Teamster, if they're a member of CSEA, if they're a police officer, correction officer, DA investigator. But you also pay the tab, as do I, as a taxpayer. And we have a fiduciary responsibility. This I learned long before government in my years in corporate life. Our fiduciary responsibility is to make sure that we spend money as wisely as we can. And I think we've shown over the prior 4 years as we've cut the general tax levy for the county. This year we have a frozen general tax levy. Let's not confuse that with the special districts. Those are two separate entities and how they're funded. But when we're able to bring in a zero for the general tax levy after years of reduction of it, that shows fiscal management, fiscal prudence, which we'll talk a little bit more about in a second. So it's important to understand that when the workforce wants certain benefits, there's a price attached to that. We have to be sure that we can afford to pay the price because the taxpayers will ultimately be footing the bill in the way they submit taxation, whether it's sales taxation, property taxation, mortgage recording, hotel occupancy tax, whatever those revenue streams are that come into the county government. Suffice to say, we have professionals negotiating on this. We look forward to working with the remaining two unions in a spirit of cooperation. We understand there's differences of opinions, and we understand that certain members of these unions feel very strongly. They have a right to feel strongly. We have a right to try to negotiate those differences out and try to get to closure. And that's what we intend to do. So that is an update as where we are in terms of our correction officers.